Welcome, everyone, to True Crime Paranormal. I'm your host, Josh Turner. They call me Wolf. This is True Crime Paranormal. I got to get used to saying that. Like I said, I guess we could call it something like TCP.
I got to get used to hearing it.
TCP, they're like True Clown Posse.
It doesn't roll off the tongue like PRT.
PRT, TCP. Yeah, it does. PRT, TCP. And PRT, folks, in case you don't know, that's our other show. That's our other channel. Go check out Paranormal Roundtable. We drop, I guess because we didn't say it last week, we drop shows almost every day.
Yeah.
And we do live streams on Sunday and Wednesday. We retell people's encounters, and then we have open lines on Monday. People come on and tell their encounters. We get into all kinds of crazy stuff. Tuesday is the Patreon show. And then we do Thursday, which is the members only on YouTube show. So go check that out. And then on Friday, we do interviews where we just talk one-on-one. Well, I say one-on-one. There's like maybe 2 or 3 of us talking with a guest about their paranormal and weird, unexplainable stuff that goes on. And then Saturday is going to be True Crime Paranormal on this channel, and then right back to Sunday. So full lineup all week long, same people just doing different stuff, talking about different things. But we hope that you continue to come and, enjoy the True Crime Paranormal. And so without further ado, let's get into it. We got to get going on this Ed Gein thing. And so that's, I don't know what you make of this. We'll play it one more time. Play the clip again, and that you can hear a laughter that's not coming from Eddie.
What did you intend to do with their body, Mr. Warden?
You hear it? There's like a snickering there. There's like a laugh, like an EVP.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from something out. It was probably an attachment he had. And that's what disconnected this guy from the real reality. Like, you hear about the black-eyed kids, right? And, we interviewed several people. One of the guys that I interviewed, this is going to tie into this a little bit here. His name was Dragon. And I know that sounds a weird name, but that's actually a name that's a little more common in Serbia and Croatia. He was Serbo-Croatic, which is, I guess, problematic when they were in the Civil War. But he was, Serbo-Croatic, and I worked with this guy at that place where that guy Oscar, where I had and he had a weird interaction with him. But then we ended up, this is a different company we worked for. We ended up working together at a retirement home. I was working 4 days, he was working 3. And I remember when they first called us to go work there, it was 24/7 for the first few days, and I was relieving him. And then we had to switch to 12 hours a night, and I did I think Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and he did Friday, Saturday, Sunday because he could only work on the weekend or something like that. And I remember it was because a guy that worked there at a retirement home. Now, this was a pretty nice place. It wasn't, like one of these dingy, dirty places where people just go to pass away, like a nursing home, which was what that place was where the homeless guy was living.
The place down south.
Yeah, down south, where they converted it into like a homeless apartments or whatever, indoor apartments. But it was crazy. There was a guy that took a cat up to like the 4th floor, and he just tossed it off the 4th floor. And I remember when they showed us the picture of this guy, and Dragon was like, looks like a real nice guy. He's like, look at him, his face. He looked like the Jeffrey Dahmer. And I looked at the guy's face, and I said, Dragon, you're right. He does. And we were kind of looking at each other, and he's shaking our heads, and he goes, and he puts his finger on the picture, and he goes, I've seen lots of guys like that, ugly guys, man. He goes, and they go join the army in Serbia so they can go kill and do things, He said, but here, maybe there's no war or whatever. They just go and do these things, or they're a coward. And he made a good point. He was making a point about it. And I don't know whatever happened to that goofy. He was a beady-eyed guy with long hair, like reddish blonde hair, beady eyes. They always have those little beady eyes. You can see it.
Yeah, those little black pits.
Those little pits, and he was the guy that threw the cat, And when you were talking to the ladies and a couple of the guys that worked there, And the residents, they were all like just freaked out, terrified of this guy. He was so weird, and he had threatened some of the people that lived there. So the police were looking into him. And this was like back in 2006 or something like that, before I started my security company. And I remember thinking, like, this dude, like, that is the kind of person, like, you know, that would be gravitating toward a job where he could lord over people. You know what I mean? And there's obviously some sort of demonic attachment to people like that. I mean, it's very clear and very obvious. But at that particular place, Dragon had a weird experience that I have not told on the show as of this recording, and it involved the black-eyed children. And it was weird the way he told it. It was like, and we covered Elijah, the security guard from Fort Worth's case. And it's like there's people around, but they don't see you. You know, it's kind of like you're in this pocket reality.
Yeah.
They pull you into. And I wonder about that with these serial killers, because there's a very famous story about Ted Bundy, you know, like dragging a body. And there was these hikers like in Utah or something, and they tripped over her.
Yeah.
And then they got freaked out and they ran off, and he thought he was about to get busted. You know, and it was like, dude, I mean,
well, his attachments, I think sometimes they'll protect the
they
vessel.
do.
Yeah.
They protect that
it's like
vessel.
part of the magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that they can make people blind to what is going on right in front of them. Dahmer's another one with the Synthesophone child, the kid, the Cambodian kid. That was his last name, I think. But he was literally, that police had him, and he convinced the police that it was a lover's quarrel. And they gave him back to Dahmer, and then Dahmer finished doing what he was doing. I mean, you can't tell me he was pulled over, and we'll talk about his case eventually too, but he was pulled over by a policeman, you know, and there was his first victim. And if that policeman would have done his job, then guess what? All those people wouldn't have been murdered by this dude. And you never truly know the number, because I think, one, they lose count of how many people they do this to. And then two, they would rather take it to their grave than tell you. You know, I don't think Dahmer only killed 17 people. I don't think Gacy, I don't think he admitted to everything he did, or any of these people. I think Gein probably did more than 2 people too. And with him, though, he may not actually remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, my whole thing with Gein, because I know you've talked about some people just being born beyond redemption. I think, again, it all goes back to his mother being the obviously main source of just his mental fracture that would just worsen after her death, because now he was alone. He didn't have his brother, who was, like you said earlier, his conscience. He didn't have his mother, who was the domineering religious fanatic, just making him afraid of the outside world. He learned at a very early age that obedience is equal to love. If I'm obedient to more so obedient to this rigid moral system that my mother created, then that means I'm loved. So I feel like that just made him the perfect vessel for any demonic attachment to just take hold of him.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think it was, and not to, excuse what he did or his behavior, any of that, because at the end of the day, we have free will. That's how God made us. But it would have made it just that much easier for anything to attach to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the connection that Maddie was talking about with the mother, he had that weird relationship with her. And he actually admits during some of his interviews and therapies that he would do when he was a prisoner at the mental institution, he admitted that when he was a teenager, he saw his mother unalive and gut a pig in front of him, and when his mother pulled the guts out, that he was sexually aroused. And so with the mother's almost false teachings of the Bible, that she would twist the words of the Bible to fit her narrative, it opened him up for these attachments. And then I look and I think of these 72 of the lesser keys of Solomon, and what comes to my mind would be the Asmodeus, who's known for causing marital issues and strife and massive chaos, which was what was going on between the mother and the father all those years.
And if you were to look at, that's a good point. And getting to know what the names of these entities, just like the case with Gypsy Rose, that we think it was Visago, which was the third of the Goetic. And the reason that they're numbered like that is because that's the order that they were taken in by Solomon and taken prisoner with the ring that God gave him with the seal of Solomon. But if you look at Asmodeus, he was a very vicious, angry entity. And when he was taken in by Solomon, like he cursed at Solomon and threatened him. And Solomon was like, I don't think you understand the predicament you're in. You're not going anywhere, and you're pretty much my prisoner. And so saith the Lord, And so he had to deal with his incarceration, which I guess was temporary. Eventually he was, freed from whatever, but not until supposedly they were forced to build the temple. Here's what's crazy about him. He is the father of the marital strife, and he was once obsessed with a woman named Sarah, and I have my own story that I've told on the show about him. But I can tell you something. When it comes to these demons and these archons, I think that they operate just like any standard, food chain. I mean, if you were to look at a lion making a kill, everybody eats, down to the vultures, down to the jackals, and of course the hyenas and whatever. So let's say that this particular entity gets its hooks into the parents of Gein. And if you look at it this way, right, they're victims of this machinations of this archon. That fractures and destroys the mind of little Eddie and his brother. And then these opportunistic entities come in and prey on them. Not necessarily Asmodeus and when you say Asmodeus, I'm not talking about just him personally doing this. It's because each one of these has legions. Some of them have up to like 100 and something legions, right? The stronger, the more powerful they are, the more legion followers they have, right? So I don't know what it says about how many legions he has, but that's what those particular legionnaires do. That's what they do. They attack that particular weakness, because that's how they feed. It's part of an evil ecosystem. I'm not even joking. And if you were to start to look at the world from that particular ecosystem, you could learn how to fight and defend and defeat these things. Christ came down on this earth to give us that ability. And I know that once we talk about Christ and the true reality, there's people that are automatically tune out. And you know what that is? That's those demons telling you to not listen to us. You're going to hell. I'm telling you right there right now. I'm over here slaving away on a hot microphone. You know why? Because I'm selfless. That's why.
And I'm going to save as many people as possible.
They call me Baby Wolfie. I'm kidding, folks. But the point being, though, no, in all seriousness, Asmodeus does his army, his people, whatever, do the initial attacks, right, on these families, and they're doing big time work against the family unit. But that opens up these splits. That opens up for all kinds of strife in other people's lives and in the fracturing of the soul of other people. And then these other entities move in and they do what they do. These vampiric entities, these shape-shifting entities, they take hold and they drag you into an alternate reality. And what I've said before, and this being the first episode of this show, or I guess now be the second episode of the show, what I've said before, and I'll say it again on this show, I've said it on Paranormal Roundtable, hell, people don't really understand the nature of reality. It's not like you're immediately facing judgment the moment you die. You're going to face judgment on Judgment Day like everybody, right? Why would you need to be facing it twice? You're already facing judgment. Well, here's what happens. I believe that if you die outside the favor of the Lord, and you're not accepted by Christ, and Christ says the only way to God is through him, right? Well, if you fall outside of that grace, you're taken to these abysmal places and tortured and tormented because these beings can do whatever they want with you. If you were in hell and it's at the very end and it's the lake of fire, torment, whatever, these entities are going to be there with you being tormented. There's no like, yeah, you're all going to be suffering and in fire, because it says in the end that God's going to take hell and throw hell into the lake of fire. So essentially, hell is not necessarily the lake of fire. Hell is everybody's own reality turned upside down, inward and backward, because you created it. You know what I mean? And I do believe that it was demonic entities of some kind who probably, put that in Ed to be aroused by the blood and the guts of this pig, from slaughtering a pig. So he equated that with like a euphoric feeling. But you got to remember too, there are people walking this earth that have a Nephilim bloodline. The gene is in them. If you look at his mother, his mom, I mean, dude, what is that? She looks like what's his name, Grandpa Munster? Like she literally looks like him, the guy that played the vampire in the Munsters.
Yep, I know what you're talking about.
Another case of soulless eyes.
Yeah, I know. When I looked up her photo just to see what she looked like, I was like, okay, that's enough of that. It just literally gave me the creeps. Like I had to just quickly X out and not. It just felt like she's just, even her photo feels like she's staring right through your soul. It's really unsettling. Yeah. So I could only imagine just being raised by that with all the, religious fanaticism and all the whole, fire, brimstone, and damnation, and just fixating on that, and while ignoring every other part of the Bible.
That was his whole world, was his mother. And then when she, passed away, with all the spiritual openings and the trauma from the father growing up after the hardship of losing his family, then I think when you look at Gein, you see Baal. You see the invisibility, secrecy, hiding, confusion, which causes the withdrawal. So he withdrawed from everybody, and he was in that farmhouse by himself. When the police went in and they looked at the home, it was surrounded by trash and body parts. It was just spiders and vermin were the only living thing around him, and pestilence. And what does pestilence bring in? Evilness and these evil spiritual entities that could have been around him. And so then I want to get into, and everybody knows what he's famous for, rebuilding the suit of his mother, right? But when I think of that, you know what I think of? I think of these demons, and I think of when Lucifer said, that they were jealous of us because we were made in the image of God. And so what if really the reason why he was wearing this skin suit is because when he was going through one of his states of confusion and possession, that whatever entity was controlling him was trying to masquerade and mock the image of God, surrounded by human faces that were on the wall, the lamp, the belt.
The first name that comes to mind when I think of pestilence, now there's two. I mean, I think of Pazuzu, obviously, I think because everybody knows the movie The Exorcist, they probably know who Pazuzu is, a Sumerian demon who caused like crop failure, infertility, but in particular, disease. But Beelzebub, who supposedly was second only to Lucifer in his power, known as the Lord of the Flies. I mean, and he was anywhere there's rot, and just pestilence, and and that name is also associated with the Canaanite Baal, which is like that means Lord too, but it also is like their to the ancient Israelites, they equated that with like their main god of and Baal Haman was the main but Baal would be and then there's another way to spell it, which was Beelzebuth. That thuth is always found in Lilith, and then of course you take those different spellings and different incarnations or like what am I trying to say? the different ways to say their names. There's these incantations that people do, and I'm not going to get into a bunch of like repeating of their names and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, that opens the door, whatever this one, archon does opens the door for these other ones to do things. And you get into a downward spiral, and eventually the vessel is completely destroyed. It's gone. The soul is imprisoned, enslaved. And the destruction that is left by one of these people. Here in the community that we are in, the paranormal and / cryptid community, we've seen so many people with so many bad ways cause so many problems and harm for people, because this kind of stuff, it attracts a certain type of person. Some people are just curious. They want to learn, and they want to, be a part of it, or they like it for the entertainment. But it attracts another type of person, and that's the grifter, the fraud, the phony, the deviant. Some of these people that are attracted to it for that, and then others still that are attracted to it because they're not mentally well. And they're there to literally do harm and try to find victims to mess with and harass. And we've seen that over the last few years. Like when I first got into the paranormal, like I did not know that I was jumping into a sea full of sharks, and but I learned pretty quick, I mean, you have to be an orca to swim these waters, man. And the true crime thing, we're new to the true crime field or whatever, but I want to do it in a way that's not really been done. And that is to go deep, as they say, hard in the paint, to figure out like what is at the root of this and what could be causing these problems for these people. And I think Ed Gein is a good place to start, because even though he wasn't like one of the very, very first, he's that one. By the time that he did what he did, it was post World War II, and the media could blow it up and sensationalize it. Television was just becoming a thing, and the radio was a big thing, and so everywhere you looked, people were talking about the ghoul of Plainsfield, or the butcher. They call him the butcher of Plainsfield. And I do think that there's a lot that's hidden that we'll never know about this guy and what was going on in his mind and why he wanted to create the mother suit. Did he want to wear it and become his mother to punish himself for his own crimes? Was it part of like an intricate realm that he created?
From what I understand and what I read, he just felt lost without her. I mean, that was his whole world, his whole moral system, because he was taught by his mother that the outside world is a threat. So he wanted to symbolically become her, because even in his interviews, he described his mother as good, as pure, and she was the sole kind of like authority, like chosen by God. Because really, when you look at it, Augusta Gein was a hypocrite. She condemned women. Women are instruments of the devil, but she didn't submit to her husband. She made all the decisions for the house. She cherry-picked scripture and twisted it. So she was breaking all of her own rules, but the way religious fanatics like that use religion to abuse people do it is they excuse their own sins by saying, well, it's because I'm chosen by God. So for me, it's okay. So it's very much like rules for thee, but not for me. And she just projected her own sins onto other people.
And there's always this do as I do, or do as I say, not as I do, from parents. Mm-hmm. I know growing up as a Gen Xer, that was a big one from the boomers. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm going to go and do all these other things, and you go and you do what I tell you. And then you just have to accept it, But, yeah, there is a point where I think listening to other people can be very beneficial, But if that person's like telling you, hey, let's go commit these crimes and do all these other yeah, you're not going to get, like a lot of leniency if you just say, well, my friend told me to. Like cults, you see that happen all the time. You're still going to be in trouble. I mean, you're still enacting the will of somebody evil, and you're still going to pay for what you've done. And I think to me, I think it was really deep psychologically with Gein that he wanted to be his mother. And this is going to sound crazy, but I have a theory about this, right? I think that he was trying to recreate himself as his mother to rein himself in.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, because without her, what stopgap did he have to just
He probably felt like she was his
going off the
conscience.
rails? Well, yeah, because it was his brother.
Yeah.
And then he kills him. I'm just going to say it. I think he killed him.
Oh, I absolutely
Yeah.
believe
So
that
let's
too.
say he kills Henry, and then who's the next in line to listen to? His mother, and she's bat poop crazy, you know? And then what happens? There's nobody left, and now the train is just on the tracks, and there's no engineer. It's just off the rails.
And I think something was confusing him and whispering to him. He had mentioned how he was always listening to the radio as his hobby, but how was he listening to the radio all those years when he had no running water and no electricity?
Yeah. So what were you listening to? You know, it's like, can you imagine like what was going on? And he had these books, and of course on the documentary of Netflix, they tried to make it out like he was fascinated with the Nazis or whatever, but it was actually his uncle that he talked about all the time, who was in World War II, according to him. His uncle was in the Great War. He always talked about that. And he was in the South Pacific, and he was enthralled by these stories of like cannibal tribes and shrunken heads, and his uncle brought back souvenirs, you know, like there were all these different stories that he told him, you know, of the Japanese cruelty and atrocity, especially to the natives, you know, and I read that somewhere that that was part of what made him, like, it really got him going, like the torture. And so to me, for him to be such a mild-mannered guy and go out in public and just be, you know, little Eddie and then babysitter Eddie, you know, a person that you could trust with your children. And then in the meantime, he's murdering women and trying to make a skin suit and digging up dates, you know, to hang out with, you know, and then the local cemetery, you know, that speaks volumes to how people can camouflage themselves, and these entities can just lie in wait, you know, and be inside of somebody, literally. And at any time, they can be like an ambush prey. They can strike. Anthony, you were telling me something on the way over here about a guy that got punched. What was that you were saying?
I was talking about this guy who was on video. He was on the subway, and he had these headphones in, and he was looking at his phone, and he was not paying attention. He was in a public place, and the subway of all places, not the safest of places. He's in a public place, and he's completely oblivious to his surroundings, and you see that this mentally unhinged guy walk up to the side of him and then just punch his lights out as hard as he can and knock him out cold. But before he got to that guy, he was like, it's like he was looking for a target, and he found his target because he saw that guy who was not paying attention to anything around him.
Headphones in.
Yep, headphones in, looking at his
phone,
head down, nothing.
Yeah, that to me is how these archons and demons, that's what they do.
Yeah.
They look for somebody who's not paying attention, not plugged in, not aware. You're not in the real reality. You're over there in your own little reality that you've created, and the next thing you know, you're unconscious. You know, I mean, it's crazy, dude. Like, I have a friend that lives in Florida, you know, and there's gators. And there's gators in East Texas, too, don't get me wrong. You got to be careful. Any body of water from East Texas to Florida, you got to be careful just going swimming because there's gators in all those southern states. But in particular, Louisiana is just full of them, and so is Florida because of the swampy conditions. But a friend of mine, he lives in Florida, and he was telling me that this guy just went on a golf course, I guess. He was playing golf with his dad, with the guy that told me this. It was his dad's friend. And he hit a ball on the 9th hole in one of these golf courses in southern Florida, and he just went in to get his ball, and his dad told him, "Hey, man, you know, I know you're from." He was from South Carolina, but he told the guy, he said, "Hey, man, you're not from here, but don't do that." And there was a guy that his dad was in the military with in Vietnam, and he says, "Oh, we were in the jungles of Vietnam." He goes, "Yeah, but these are gators, and there's a big one that hangs around this golf course, and I already told you that." But, you know, and then while the guy's sitting there kind of back talking this dude's dad and just drinking profusely and not listening and having a good old time, this gator literally comes out of the water on the other side behind the guy. And the guy turns around and sees like this 10-foot gator crawling out of that water. And luckily for him, the gator, I guess, wasn't hungry, or it wasn't into. Maybe it didn't want to snack at that time. I don't know, but luckily it didn't come out the side where he was at and grab him, and he's pointing with the golf club. Did you see that? And him and this other guy, his dad's cousin or whatever, and they're pointing and they're like, "Did you see that?" And the guy was like, "Oh, oh man!" And then he freaks out and goes, "Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, man. That's crazy. I didn't even know that's was a thing."
Gators are ambush predators. So.
Yeah, and he just walked in there. He goes, "I don't care." So, it's a hot summer day. He just goes in there in his shorts and, goes and grabs his ball or whatever, just digging around in that water. He didn't need to do that, but he makes his own rules, he's he's going to do what he wants to do, and then right there, it could have been disastrous. That guy at the very least could have been maimed. And then at worst, he could have been unalived and eaten right there on the golf course. And that's something, it's not as prevalent now because they take precautions a lot, more, but it still happens. But this was a big gator that was on that golf course. And this was like back in the 80s. But I mean, that right there to me, these things are just right there. According to, and I'm not Islamic, all right? I'm Christian, but I've read the Quran. And one of the most interesting things is when it talks about the jinn, which is like our version of like a demon, right? It says they exist a right angle from a right angle. I mean, they're right there. They're just right there. And Jesus tells us like they're just, it's, and when he says Satan, it's actually a plural. It's shaitan. It's a race of beings known as the shaitan. And the shaitan, what they are actually the archons, the fallen angels. And Jesus talks about them as a hungry lion seeking whom he may devour. And like I said, it's not just one. There's a whole race of these beings, and they are evil, dude. They have thrown their lot in with evil and chaos, and the more damage they can do to us as the people, especially those that are, because we are, like you said, made in God's image, and they're jealous and they're angry. And that's not the whole thing, though. The whole thing is that they actually want to use you as energy. By the time of this recording, I don't know if we will have dropped it yet, but I know that one of my best friends, everybody knows him, his name's Gary, but he goes by Scorpion. He talks about going to a place when he went to sleep called the City of Night. And when we first talked about the City of Night on the show, on Paranormal Roundtable years ago, a multitude of people reached out to me and said, I've been there. I've seen this place, including my own wife. I've been there too. And so it's like a alternate reality where people go and it's very dimly lit. You can see, but it's very dimly lit. And I am of the belief that the light in that place are souls. That yellowish dim light that you see, those are people's souls that light it up. And I believe the whole thing is run on human souls as like batteries. And I think that it's run by archons. And I can tell you, man, I think, and don't quote me on this because I'd have to look it up, but I think it's the Gospel of Philip, or it could be the Gospel of Thomas. These are, it's like apocryphas, right? But Jesus tells his brother James, he says, flee Jerusalem for it is full of archons. He's telling his brother that. Like why would Jesus tell you this place is full of archons, you need to flee? Unless he's telling you to be very careful and wary of the archons and what they can do to you. And there are two different kinds. Since this is one of the early shows on this channel, I would like to point out, because you're going to hear more about this as we go on case to case to case. One of the things you got to know is that there is an army of rebellious angels that fell. The prevailing thought is that they fell with Lucifer. And then the second falling was the 200 watchers. And that's where you get the demons. What was technically a demon is from the Nephilim bloodline of the watchers. Their children and their children's children. It's a bloodline. And the 200 watchers, they were punished severely for what they did. And the leader of the 200 watchers, Semyasa, and of course, Azazel was one of the worst offenders, and there were different names, that were involved in what they did. And I also believe that they could have represented the gods of Olympus, the Olympian gods. And it's very possible that when they came, they were supposedly put here in the book of Enoch. It talks about them being put over man to watch over us and to actually protect us. And instead, they tried to enslave us and had children with women and with human women, which I believe were giants back in those days. Men and women were really tall. And they had offspring that were just brutal and mean and cruel, being of half angelic, half human bloodline. And when they all died, they became evil spirits for all time, and they plagued the earth, right? So you have two different things going on here. You have these goetic demons, which are actually the original rebellious angel archons, and then you have the 200 Watchers fallen and their offspring. So you have two different things there. And I do believe that they could be mixed up as far as the Titans, because they were imprisoned. Some of them were put under the River Euphrates. Some of them were put under the earth and all this stuff, different stuff. But it could have been some of these evil, a third of the angels that fell. They could have been here, like imprisoned here. And the 200 Watchers may have had to fight them when they came, leading to the story of the gods and the Titans. But then the gods were evil, petty, and cruel too.
Yeah.
Because, Zeus and Odin and all of them, they always were doing very human, crappy things to people. And you're going like, you're the god? You're not a god. You're just evil. It's like you're just a very ignorant, evil person, and that's, I think, where the whole idea of the demiurge comes in. And I think that we all have a connection to the true living God, the Father of Christ. And I think that's where this fractal soul, like we are pieces of God, and like we come down and we live our lives, and each life goes back to like a soul matrix. And then eventually, you transcend, you get off of this wheel, and that's where Jesus comes in. He's trying to tell you, you don't have to sit here and go over and over again on this wheel. And I think people like Ed Gein, what do you think happens to them when they pass away? Like, what is your opinion, Rain? What do you think happened to old Eddie when he passed away? What do you think happened to him?
First of all, I think that we're dealing with a full-blown possession case.
Yeah.
When he was arrested that night during his interrogation, the next day he was asking the interrogator, "Hey, I woke up and my heart was beating really fast. And I didn't know what was going on, and another officer was asking me if I was okay." His heart was he was attacked in his sleep, which the heart connection, and then you have the brother who they had originally thought he had a heart attack. The sheriff of the town, he had a heart attack and died as well while this is going on. So you just have these weird coincidences. So, who am I to judge, where we go, what happens? I don't know how God would look at us being so forgiving the way that he is, knowing that some of the things maybe that they did, or, some of the things that these horrible crime people do really wasn't them. So I'm not really sure what happens to any of those people who commit these horrible crimes, because maybe it was something else puppeteering them.
Yeah, and if that here's the thing, I know a lot of people are going to listen to this, and it's going to go over their heads, and they're not going to really understand where I'm coming from with what I've said tonight, and what I said on the last episode, the first episode. And I know they're not going to understand, and if they're not a paratrooper, now what I mean by that is a follower of Paranormal Roundtable, they're probably not going to get it. But this is not just a show, just your regular run-of-the-mill show about ghosts, and it's not just about people killing people and all that. No, this is, I want to know. Like, I really want to know. I can't say, and I'm not asking you to judge them, by the way, Rain, but I mean, I can't say where he went or what happened to him, but I know that when your mind is in different pieces, I'm very curious, how does that work? Do each piece become its own whatever and go to a different reality of punishment?
I mean, he was just so disconnected from reality. I mean, he really didn't stand much of a chance, and just to kind of backpedal to the nature versus nurture again, his brother grew up the same way, but his brother was more independent thinking, more social, Yet, Ed was the one who would go on to do these horrific things.
Mhm.
So it just makes you wonder. And his mom, despite having grown up, I believe it was documented as possibly being Lutheran in a very religious household. She didn't believe in organized religion. So there was no correction or anything, no community there. She discouraged friendship. So all he knew was that. So what he thought was, the word of God was false teachings. He never learned the true word.
I think that what happens is when you're forced, like Ed Gein, you look at it from his perspective, like he's got this crushing puritanical rule over him that everything he does is bad. If he even looks at himself naked, like he's a bad person for that. He's like, if he looks at a woman sideways, he's a bad person, and everything he does is basically a sin. And it's used to, and it confounds him, and it's used to bind him and trick him. And there's a lot of people that go through that. There are people in multiple different sects of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam that they are still living in that sort of fear. And I think that they just latched onto that. But it was a very effective way to control people. And I think Ed Gein is a microcosm of that control, that puritanical, false Christian doctrine, because there is a true Christian doctrine and a false Christian doctrine. I think the false part comes when people start latching on too much to the Old Testament and using the man-made laws of a bygone era, that Jesus says are done away with, and he's very clear about it too. He's like, I came to fulfill the law, not to change it, right? But those laws, the ones that are made by man, that they never should have been in place and never should have been there in the first place. He's talking about the laws of God, and God is very specific. But you get this weird, almost cringy when you read it. It's just like, come on, dude. You can tell these are the words of people. Like, oh, God wants 72 virgins. And then, and it says it when they invaded the Edomites or whatever, they destroyed the Ammonites or the Edomites. And it was, God wants you to bring us these 72 virgins. Then later Islam globs onto that and says, oh, well, when you die, you get 72 virgins. And so you get all of this violence that's just,
Or if your wife lies about being a virgin at the time of marriage and you find out, you're entitled to stone her to death.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get all of this horrific anger and violence that's being, supposedly coming from God. Which later Jesus is saying like, hey, hold on, you wrote that, it's not, and they didn't like what he said, so they got rid of him. But I think that it keeps going back to this because someone like Ed Gein, if you put a bow on this, wrap it up and put a bow on it, I think that he is a case study in what happens when religion is taken out of context and used as a tool of oppression and control.
The fact that Ed Gein's mental faculties are described as almost childlike, and when you combine that with the religious or pseudo-religious manipulation of his mother, that when it comes to him in the afterlife, I do think that he would receive a certain level of spiritual mercy, but maybe his version of hell or being held accountable for all the terrible, gruesome things that he's done is the realization in and of itself of how evil his deeds really were in the afterlife. Like, can you imagine if you went through life doing all these terrible things, but while you were alive, mentally you were not able to fathom like this is a demonic thing that I am doing. But then in the afterlife, all of that information, that moral compass is like downloaded to your mind instantly. You know how if you've ever been out of your body, the way you understand things, it's like so much quicker. It's like an instantaneous download of information and like instantaneous connection of different ideas, and you can understand exactly how all these things fit together. If you spent your life doing the things that Ed Gein did, and then you are now deceased and in the afterlife, would the complete understanding of what you have done at that point not in and of itself be a punishment, be a form of hell?
Yeah.
Good point.
And then there are those that I believe that are born beyond redemption. Like, I think that they're a piece of the fractal soul that comes back and they don't have any empathy. They don't understand it. Like I've said before, there'll be a car wreck and they can look and see everybody standing around crying and suffering and feeling sad because someone was killed. They don't understand that. They know that something happened and that they should feel a certain way, but they feel nothing. So they learn to pretend like they feel things so that they can fit in and then, manipulate and
to fit into society.
Yeah. And your thoughts, Madeline, on where he's at?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Anthony kind of mentioned and what he was saying, that I feel like with Ed Gein, I don't think he was someone that was necessarily born beyond redemption. I feel like there would probably be a bit more leniency with him in the afterlife just because, again, he was so isolated, domineering mother who made sure to make him so terrified of the outside world that he just never left that farm. And it was just that isolation was worsened after his brother died and then his mother. So he really had no guidance. The only guidance he had was a very twisted mother who used the Bible to just control and just domineer and make him fearful.
And think of how much time, the Wisconsin winters are unforgiving, brutal, cold. And imagine, in days where he was probably just snowed in for, a week at a time, 2 weeks, whatever. And just, can you imagine, what did he do in a freezing cold house left to his own devices?
In that depressing weather for that amount of time.
Yeah, because I know that if alone time is good. And for anybody, it's good to have that alone time. But if it's too much and it's just ongoing and there's no breakup of the monotony, it can really lead to some problems. Running a security company, when I first started it, the first 3 years, I did the math. I had 9 days off in 3 years, all told. And there was only 2 days in that first year that I'd had taken off, and that was Christmas. And I believe it was Easter. I took off on Easter. No, I actually worked. Never mind. That was the second year I was off on Easter. I was off on Thanksgiving and Christmas, and the rest of the time, the next 2 to 3 years after that, it was very seldom that I would take off. My business partner, actually, who's like me, he was a workaholic, and he would sometimes just say, "Hey, man, take a couple days." Because, I'd be working for 3 or 4 months straight, and then I would take a couple days, and then I'd take a couple days. So it got to where it was about maybe 6 to 8 days a year I would take off work. But now, and of course, Anthony, Maddie, y'all work with me, that I'm always out in the field at some point of the day or night. I mean, there is no real day off. But I'm not having to sit on post for hours and hours alone. I mean, in some of those sites, you're on a construction site well in the middle of nowhere, you might not see another living soul. Like I would go in and all the workers are already gone. I get off, I go home. The only people I see are in traffic, and then I just wash, rinse, repeat. And then on occasion, you'll see a contractor work late or a whatever. And I'll start to go, "Hey man, I got to have some human interaction here." You know what I mean? So the obvious place for me was to go to a gambling den or a massage parlor or, somewhere to throw dice and just get really drunk, or an opium den. You know what I'm saying?
The
right?
usual.
Y'all get it, right? No, I would go to church and I would have them smack me on the back with whips if I looked at another person incorrectly. No, just, well, there you go. And there's the two different sides, I mean, she was always on him about his dad. He was an alcoholic and whatever. And, and she was, he was a very bad role model, the absolute opposite of
absolutely.
pureness and whatever. And his mother was the good one or whatever. But when you look at her, you're just going like, I could just look at this lady and smell the evilness coming off of her, the sulfur,
And why do you think that's how they punish prisoners now, is solitary confinement?
Mm-hmm.
And so when Ed went to his mental institution, maybe whatever entity was attached to him at the time when he was doing all those crimes, wasn't really being that controlling of him because he was the model prisoner. He had actually some human connection than being isolated all the time. And so that entity is now out in the world trying to cause more chaos. And then we have the connection to what's going on right now with Jonathan Gerlach, who was just a recent person that is all over the news for being discovered as this grave robber
Robbing
out of
weirdo.
Kentucky
Mm-hmm.
with hundreds and hundreds of pieces of people's bodies. So was that an entity that had attached to him that was setting him up to be the next Ed Gein?
And who knows, like, what if this is some evil entity that has, and I'm not talking about just the legions that it comes from. What if there is one in particular that, like, is responsible? Like, that's another avenue that, that what if it is like something that's been going on since the time of the Crusades or before, attaching itself from one, murdering person to another. And, I mean, there's a weird story. A friend of mine used to live in France, and he actually gave me a story. He's the one that years ago on the Paranormal Roundtable show. For those that are paratroopers, you'll remember this. He had something. He was living in a little chateau, and when his family, his wife, and him divorced, and they basically were ghostwriters. They wrote these romance, not whatever. Well, if you want to call them that, that's putting it nicely, but. He was very honest about it, and he was living in Canada at the time when he told me the story, but he used to live in France. And so he moved to he's a French Canadian, his mother. And he said that, he didn't get anything but this little chateau, and he had this weird entity that crawled out of the mirror. And he was isolated and alone. He said, I thought I was going crazy, and he began to talk to me about something that was in his family that had been in Tours, the city of Tours, and they had unearthed like a sarcophagus of one of his ancestors. He was a direct descendant, and this guy had fought, in the Crusades, like, way back in like I think he's like the 13th century or something like that, 12th century. And that there was a piece of this guy that was kept at his family's home when he was a child.
Okay, describe peace, because what are we talking about? A piece of his clothes?
Because there was a ring, and then a piece of his cloak, and then part of a finger.
Oh.
And it was kept in this case by and it was passed down from his grandfather and his grandfather's grandfather, and it had supposedly just been in their family for generations. And it wasn't his house, it was at his grandparents' house. But he said that when he left to go to that chateau, that he took that ring with him. Like he took it off of the finger and took it with him. And it was like a ruby, And he said it was a pretty big, heavy ring. And, I asked him, I said, what if that's what was causing all the problems when you were in that chateau? And it was something in him or that was messing with him. And I told him, I said, if the ring was solid gold, I don't think it would be the ring, but the stone could have something. Because I don't think a solid gold ring or silver or gold or copper or any of these pure metals will hold that evil charge. I don't. But I do believe that a stone or a crystal or quartz, whatever different things can hold types of vibration and energy. And he said, yeah, that's very possible. So if something can reach out from generations and generations and from like the Crusades, part of a knight who brought something back from the Holy Land, like a relic, or maybe from Rome, and then it ends up in France, where he's from on his dad's side, and then he takes it with him, to this little chateau, and it was just one of the items that was in a box, as a possible culprit, but the case that it was in was not some plastic or glass or whatever. It was in a crystal type case. The artifacts were covered. And he broke it and took it out. And I said, well, what happened to the piece of the fig? He goes, I don't know. So it's like, he's like, I did that when I was like 27 and I had it. And I'm like, wow, gee, thanks, Grandpa. This is what I get. And he goes, and, in a fit of anger and the need for money, I took it out and then I took it to sell it. And it was worth way more than what I was trying to sell it for. And he goes, and really, I should have tried to sell it to a museum. And then, of course, he loses. He doesn't know what happened to it when he moved to Canada. But, if something can go like from that far back and be attached to something, if that's what it was, imagine how something can be attached to, a person, and then when they're done with that person, they go to the next person, the next person. So my point being, like, this could have been going on for centuries, this whole, and then it ended up on Ed, some evil entity just drained him. And then once it was done with him and he could no longer do these deviant things or kill or basically give it blood sacrifice or desecration or whatever it was that it was getting out of him, sexual deviance, then yeah, it's done with him. So it just unattaches and moves on. Same thing with Dahmer. He was no longer feeling that same oppression when he was in prison because, he could no longer do what he was doing. He couldn't,
Couldn't feed it anymore.
couldn't feed that demonic entity or whatever, the archon. And then, so it was time to, and then he was at peace. He was able to supposedly find Christ. And then when he was killed, the man that killed him, of course, was insane and said, call me Christ. His name was Chris, but in the paper he wanted to be called Christ. And he said that Dahmer just stood there and let him bludgeon him, didn't even fight back. And Dahmer was like twice his size. And so he was like just ready to go. He wanted to end it. He wanted to be free from the vessel, But yeah, it's a weird thing. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Crime Paranormal. And we could have taken these shows and just put them on the Paranormal Roundtable and just made them part of our, of the archives of Paranormal Roundtable. But I really have high hopes for this show, and I want it to do big things. And I want people, lot of talking about this, and kind of laying the groundwork. So in the future episodes, you'll kind of know what we're referring to, what we're talking about. And yeah, because, if you stop and look at Gein, he's been analyzed and overanalyzed, psychoanalyzed, whatever, by every researcher out there. But I wanted to look at it from a fresh perspective of, like, what could have been going on there other than just a maniac with a shattered mind.
Yeah, and I think we're going to find a lot of connections with all these unalivers and these different groupings of different types of unalivers. And I think that our way of having an interest in this is because we're trying to protect ourselves, we're trying to protect our families. How can we spot a person that's capable of this now so that it never happens to us? Josh, you make jokes and stuff, but that's our way of coping with this. They actually coined a phrase back in the day called the Geiner, where people were so horrified about this crime that they started making jokes about it. They'd say, "Oh, what does Ed serve when you have him over for tea? Oh, lady fingers." It's their way of coping. And that's when crime tourism happened, and people started showing up in that town and trying to go to the house. They were stealing pieces of his tombstone, and they wound up burning it down and planting trees over where that house was, and everybody's just trying to move on from these crimes.
Well, they tore the building down where Dahmer was, and that funny because they tore the house down where Gacy, then they built another one right on top of it. I'm sure it's not haunted, though.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah. That was the same thing. I remember them making jokes about Gacy, like Gacy was lonely tonight. He couldn't dig up a date, and it was like, good grief, dude. Because, he buried those people. It was just, it's a way of coping with the insanity of these people. But I think if we could actually get more deeper into not just the psychological, whatever, but because it connects, the spirit connects the psychological and the physical, but
Oh, absolutely.
digging deeper into the spiritual how and why, I guess because I just want to know, like, what the hell were you thinking? Like, what was going on?
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, folks, thank you for tuning in. It's been lovely talking about all this gruesome stuff here. And I want you guys to tune in the same time next week. I think our time slot right now, we're dropping this on Saturdays, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to keep dropping them on Saturday. Thank you. Good night.
Dark deeds. Did they snap, or was it normal?